God's chosen ones. 4 hidden types no one talks about, but heaven knows exactly who you are. She didn't know why it kept happening. Her hands trembling, burning, not from fear, but from something else, something holy. It started when she was 6, holding her mother's hand in the hospital. It returned the night her best friend collapsed, and again last week when a stranger hugged her in the church parking lot and whispered, "I don't know why, but I feel healed now." She used to think it was anxiety, but deep down, something whispered, "No, beloved, this is the sign." The fire in your hands was never an accident. It was your anointing. And if your hands have burned without reason, your eyes have stared too deeply, or your feet have wandered alone, then this isn't a video. It's a divine reminder. You were marked, and now it's time to remember why. You were marked before you understood. There was always something about your body you couldn't explain. Hands, why did they get warm when someone cried near you? Your eyes, why did people look away as if you saw something they were hiding? Your fingernails, that pale crescent moon at the base, why was it only visible to some? And your feet, scarred, calloused, tired, as if you'd been walking a longer path than most, even when you were just a child. You didn't talk about it, not because you didn't notice, but because no one else seemed to. In school, you were the quiet one, the sensitive one, the one who cried during silent reading time and couldn't explain why. When your friend's parents divorced, you felt it in your chest, like it happened to you. When your dog died, you held his paw as if trying to transfer your life force through your fingertips. You weren't just emotional. You were marked, and somewhere deep inside, even as a child, you knew it. You knew your hands weren't just for holding, they were for healing. You knew your eyes weren't just for seeing, they were mirrors. You knew your solitude wasn't loneliness, it was preparation. And that strange mark on your foot, that wasn't random, that was a reminder. You were never made to walk the path of the many, but the road of the few. Chosen ones don't receive loud announcements. They receive silent signs, marks, an ache that won't go away, a warmth that flares up at holy moments. And you've felt them all, but no one ever told you what they meant, until now. In the next few minutes, I want to show you what your body's been trying to tell you since the moment you were born, that the warmth, the fire, the crescents, the stare, the scars, they were never accidents. They were blueprints, prophetic evidence, proof that your mission began before you ever prayed your first prayer. So if you've always felt set apart, different, overlooked or strange, stay, because you were never overlooked. You were hidden, and now heaven says, it's time to be revealed. Part 1, the hands that burn for no reason. She never asked for the fire. It started quietly when she was just a little girl, kneeling by her mother's hospital bed, watching the machines blink in silence. Her hands were too small to carry the weight of goodbye, but when she reached out to hold her mother's fragile fingers, something strange happened. The palms grew warm, not like touching something hot, not like a fever. It was deeper, like her hands had caught the edge of something eternal. A current, a glow, a whisper from another realm. And for the first time in days, her mother stirred, smiled, and whispered through pale lips, "I feel peace." Like heaven walked in with you. She never forgot that moment, but she learned not to speak of it. Because how do you explain to the world that your hands burn with something sacred when all they see is skin? So she kept it to herself, buried it beneath routine and reason, but the fire never left. It came back at her best friend's funeral, when she reached into the casket and laid her hand on a cold wrist and felt that same warmth, not leaving her body but surrounding it, a quiet flame that said, "You're not alone in this sorrow. You were sent to carry it gently." It came back during late nights in the ER as she held trembling strangers, and they calmed before she spoke. She called it anxiety, stress. No, but heaven had another name for it, anointing. She began to notice the pattern. Every time someone was about to break, her hands would burn. Every time someone needed to release their pain, their shame, their memories, the warmth would rise, like God reaching through her. One day, an old woman she cared for looked at her and said, "Child, do you know what you carry?" She shook her head. The woman smiled cheerfully. "Your hands remind me of prayer. They hold people like God does, not to fix them, but to find them." And that was the first time she cried, not because she was overwhelmed, but because she remembered. The gift wasn't something she needed to learn. It had been living inside her the whole time. She wasn't just comforting people. She was transmitting something, an unseen ministry that traveled through her fingertips. She began praying differently, touching with intention, listening with more than her ears, letting her hands speak where her words fell short. And people began to notice. Strangers would say, "I don't know why, but I feel better when you touch my shoulder." Children would crawl into her lap without a word. The anxious would breathe easier. The angry would grow soft. In the fire, it kept burning, quietly, faithfully, purposefully, not to destroy, but to heal. She used to think her hands were just hands, but now she knows. They are scrolls carrying messages written in spirit. They're lanterns illuminating dark rooms without speaking. They are instruments, not of power, but of peace. And every time they burn without warning, she no longer flinches. She breathes deep and says, "Speak, Lord, I'm listening," because the fire isn't random. It's her reminder. She was never just here to serve. She was sent to restore. Part 2. The eyes that see what others can't. She had always been told her eyes were intense, not beautiful, not charming, intense, strange, too much. As a child, adults would turn away mid-conversation, unsettled. Friends would say things like, "Why do you look at people like you can see through them?" She didn't know what they meant. She was just seeing, listening, watching the part they didn't say out loud. It wasn't until middle school that she realized she could read people before they opened their mouths. The girl who laughed the loudest in the cafeteria, drowning. The teacher who smiled too big, dying inside. The boy who bullied others, carrying shame he didn't know how to name. And when people lied, she didn't hear it. She felt it. Their energy, their hesitation, the invisible crack between their words and their soul. She didn't judge it, she just saw it, and it hurt. Because no one saw her the same way. No one saw her pain, her truth, her depth. Only her stare, her silence, her weirdness. So she started looking away. She dimmed her eyes in photos, learned to fake small talk, practiced not looking too long into someone's face, even when her spirit screamed, "They're not okay." But the gift didn't go away, because heaven doesn't revoke what it has anointed, only waits for you to recognize it. Years later, she found herself sitting in the back pew of a small church, worn out from pretending. The pastor was preaching, the music was soft, but her mind was somewhere else, until a teenage girl walked in, sat in the last row, and began to cry silently into her sleeve. Their eyes met. And in that moment, she knew. This wasn't about her anymore. She walked over slowly, sat down beside her, said nothing, just looked at her. Gently, fully, soul deep. The girl trembled, then whispered, "I don't know why, but I feel like you already understand." That was the day she stopped hiding. The day she realized her eyes weren't a threat. They were mirrors, windows, messengers from something older than words, the ancestors, the spirit, the callings she hadn't even answered yet. She wasn't just observant. She was an oracle. And every time someone avoided her gaze, she no longer took it as rejection. She took it as confirmation. They're not afraid of me. They're afraid of being seen. Because her eyes do not flatter, they reveal. Her presence doesn't perform, it discerns. And when she walks into a room, the energy shifts, not because she speaks, but because something in her soul silently asks, "Are you ready to face what's buried?" She has learned that her gaze is a lighthouse for the lost, a quiet alarm for the deceived, a doorway for those who've forgotten who they are. And though the world rarely thanks you for seeing what it tries to ignore, heaven always does. So now when people say her eyes are too much, she smiles, because she knows they were never meant to fit in. They were built to break through. Part 3, the crescent on your nails. She noticed it as a teenager, that pale half-moon shape at the base of her thumbnail. Everyone had them, she thought, until one day in biology class, a girl leaned over and whispered, "Yours are bigger than normal. Weird." So she began hiding her hands, folding her fingers when she talked, painting her nails dark to cover what she didn't understand. But even under polish, the crescents remained. Soft, glowing reminders that something inside her moved in rhythm with something beyond her. She didn't have the words for it then, but now she does. She was marked by the moon. Not the kind that lights up the sky, the kind that lives in your bones, in your cycles, in your rising and retreating. She was never consistent like the others. One week she could lead an entire room, the next she could barely get out of bed. They called her moody. She was actually in tune, because when the moon grew full, so did her dreams, her emotions, her creativity. And when it waned, she withdrew, not out of weakness, but obedience. The spirit was calling her inward. She tried to keep pace with the world, tried to match its linear timelines, its predictable rhythms. She failed, over and over. She thought something was wrong with her, till one night, exhausted from trying to be stable, she sat under a pale sky and finally asked out loud, "God, why am I like this?" The answer wasn't a voice. It was a memory of the forests she loved as a child, of the ocean's pull on her ankles, of the way her soul felt clearest not in crowds, but in solitude. The moon. She opened her journal and began writing, page after page, tears and poems, prophecy and pain. And when she was done, she looked down. Her hands were bare, unpainted, and the crescents on her nails glowed gently under the moonlight. And she heard it, this time in her spirit. "You don't follow the calendar of men, you follow the calendar of heaven." That was the moment she stopped apologizing for her phases. She stopped fighting her tides. She began honoring her soul's signals, when to speak, when to stay silent, when to create, when to rest, when to weep, when to rise. And everything began to flow. The relationships she once forced fell away. Routines she once followed fell apart. And in their place, peace. Because now she understood. The crescent wasn't a flaw. It was a compass, a holy mark placed by the one who knew she'd need help navigating a world that only respected straight lines, not sacred cycles. Now, when someone calls her inconsistent, she smiles. Even the moon disappears before returning brighter. Part 4. The feet that never followed the crowd. She never liked crowds. Even as a child, she would wander off during field trips, not to rebel, but to breathe. The others wanted to follow the guide. She just wanted to feel the wind. She remembers how often her mother would say, "Why can't you just walk with everyone else?" And she would try, for a little while. But something in her always drifted, always pulled, always whispered, "This isn't your road." It started with small things. She couldn't stay in relationships that others called normal, couldn't work a job that made her soul ache, couldn't fake joy to fit into rooms where God never sent her. And for a long time she thought she was broken, lost, wandering, until one day, standing barefoot on a trail with nothing but silence around her, she looked down and saw the scar. Right there, on her left foot. A small, strange, almost forgotten mark from childhood. She didn't remember how it got there, just that it never left. It pulsed as the wind blew, and something inside her whispered, "You've been marked for the solitary path, and even when you didn't know where you were going, you were still being led." She dropped to her knees, pride in the dirt, not because she was lonely, but because for the first time, the loneliness made sense. She wasn't wandering, she was carving. She wasn't running, she was obeying. The path was narrow because it was hers. The crowd couldn't follow because the calling wasn't collective. It was consecrated. Over the years, she learned to recognize the signs. Her feet would ache before a season ended. Her body would grow restless in places she'd outgrown. The road would call, not loudly, but with a knowing. And so, again and again, she left. Cities, jobs, relationships, expectations. And though no one clapped for her choices, heaven recorded every step. There were no maps, just mercy, no crowds. It was clouds by day and fire by night. And when she stumbled, because she did, she would trace her fingers along that mark on her foot, that strange little scar, and remember, the road is not punishment, it's preparation. You see, the feet of the chosen are not made for convenience. They're built for covenant. They walk where others cannot. They carry burdens in silence. They break ground without applause. But wherever they go, things change. Peace follows, truth emerges, strongholds tremble. And if you're reading this with tired feet, a tired soul, wondering why the world never made room for you, it's because you weren't sent to fit in. You were sent to go ahead. The pioneer, forerunner, trailblazer, chosen one. So keep walking. Yes, even with the scar. Yes, even when no one claps. Yes, even when you feel forgotten. Because heaven never forgets the ones who walk where no one else dares. The marks were messages. By now, you've probably looked at your own body a little differently. Maybe you rub your palms again, wondering why they warmed at moments of heartbreak and prayer. Maybe you thought about your eyes, those eyes that people said see too much, but that you now know were never meant to flatter, only to illuminate. Maybe you looked down at your nails and saw it. The crescent. That tiny moon that's been with you through every emotional tide, every rebirth, every shedding. Maybe you touched the scar on your foot, the callus, the way you walk, the ache of always walking alone. And maybe now it finally makes sense. You weren't designed to disappear into the crowd. You were formed, marked, carved, to carry God's fingerprints into the forgotten places of this world. You didn't come here to mimic. You came here to move atmospheres. That fire in your hands, that wasn't anxiety, it was divine energy, stored in your body, assigned to your assignment. That intensity in your stare, that wasn't awkwardness, that was discernment. You weren't meant to glance, you were meant to pierce. That rhythm in your soul, those phases, retreats, emotional highs and lows, weren't instability. They were the heartbeat of heaven inside a human frame. And those feet that don't like shallow places, they were born for sacred ground. You are not broken, you are being built. Your marks are not mistakes, they are maps. You were not meant to follow trends, you were meant to follow truth. It's okay to walk alone, because heaven often hides its pioneers. God does not call the perfect, He calls the marked. If this story spoke to something deep in you, if your hands have burned without reason, if your eyes have read souls no one else could see, if your rhythms didn't match the world's tempo, if your feet have walked roads no one understood, you're not crazy, you're not unstable, you're not too sensitive, you're chosen. You've just been waiting for someone to say it out loud. So, if this message found you today, leave a comment below. I'm not lost, I'm marked. And if you believe others are searching for what you just remembered, share this story, because somebody else is about to realize that the strange marks on their body were heaven's whisper all along. And if you feel led to support more sacred content like this, to be part of this prophetic mission, follow the details in the description. Your small act of faith could become someone else's divine encounter. We are not alone. We are not forgotten. We are the marked. We are the chosen.